The single millionaire father unexpectedly stumbled upon the young nanny bathing his twin boys in an old metal tub set in the middle of a sunlit garden, and in that very moment, his heart stirred. Malibu, a land of golden sunshine, blue waves, and million-dollar mansions sprawled across the slopes facing the Pacific Ocean. There lived a man admired for his wealth and talent, yet few knew the deep voids he battled within. Alexander Hayes, a tech millionaire, a single father who had never learned how to cradle his children to sleep, now lived with his 18-month-old twin sons. He excelled at managing thousands of employees, yet was clumsy before the cries of two little boys at home. His modern mansion was vast but cold, every detail arranged with absolute luxury. Marble-tiled bathtubs, imported towels, premium formula milk. Everything was flawless. Except for one thing, the two boys had never truly felt what a home was meant to be. And then, the arrival of a young woman changed everything. Isabella Cruz, 25. A Latina with long black hair and gentle eyes. She stepped into the mansion carrying only a small suitcase, yet she brought with her the one thing the house lacked: tenderness. Not every nanny could last in this place. Dozens had quit, unable to endure the relentless cries of the twins, Noah and Landon. But Isabella was different. With nothing but her arms and her soft lullabies, she soothed them, drew out their laughter, and lulled them into peaceful sleep. Since her arrival, the house had been lit with a warmth Alexander had never realized was missing. That morning, fate opened a turning point. Due to a plumbing failure, the mansion's water supply had been cut off. Isabella, not wanting Noah and Landon's skin to break out from sweat and dust, went to the neighbor's well, fetched clean water, and filled an old metal tub set among the bougainvillea in full bloom. Beneath California's gentle sunlight, she sat by the tub, cradling each movement, pouring water over the boys' soft hair. Her lullaby drifted into the breeze, transforming the lavish garden into a serene painting where simple love triumphed over every lack. At that very moment, Alexander returned from the office. A meeting had ended earlier than expected, and he drove his electric car up the stone-paved driveway. Tired, irritable, he longed only for silence. But the sound of children's giggles from the backyard slowed his steps. For the first time in days, he heard it, the sound of happiness. He walked around the veranda, and the scene before him froze him in place. In the middle of the garden, Isabella was bathing his two sons in the old tub. The boys, bare and carefree, splashed water with radiant laughter in the sunlight. The image was simple, achingly beautiful. Alexander's heart skipped a strange sensation, reminding him of all he had lost. Yet that fragile moment was quickly crushed beneath layers of pride and control. To a man accustomed to perfection, this was not warmth, it was humiliation. He saw his sons, the heirs of the Hayes family, being bathed in a rusted tub under open skies, as if they were no different from homeless children. Rage surged, blinding everything else. He strode forward, his tall figure blotting out the sun, and his thunderous voice split the air. "Do you think my sons are animals? Get out of here now." Startled, Isabella nearly dropped Noah from her arms. The twins burst into tears, their tiny hands clinging desperately to her as if she were their only refuge. But Alexander heard nothing over the roar of blood in his head. He snatched up a towel, wrapped it around his child, and carried them straight into the house, leaving Isabella standing there, her eyes brimming, her heart shattering. That seemingly small moment was the beginning of a chain of events. It would push them all into a journey of tears, redemption, and love. Well then, my dear viewers, stay tuned for a story that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly resonate with what I've shared here. And leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all around the world. When Alexander Hayes left Isabella standing in the garden, her heart felt as though it had cracked wide open. Yet endurance was nothing new to Isabella. Before becoming a nanny in the Malibu mansion, her life had already been a chain of loss and humiliation. Isabella was born in a small town near the Texas border, where the harsh sun and wind seemed intent on testing the resilience of poor working families. Her parents, Mexican immigrants, labored endlessly to raise 4 children. But a car accident stole everything when Isabella was only 15. In a single night, she became the orphaned eldest sister, clutching her 3 younger siblings beside the coffins, unable to comprehend why her world had collapsed. After the funeral, the 4 siblings were sent to live with an aunt and uncle. The tiny house, already cramped, became a burden with 4 more mouths to feed. Isabella was no longer an ordinary teenager, but transformed into an unpaid maid in her relative's home. She rose at dawn to cook, clean, and babysit for her aunt, while her 3 siblings were sent out to take odd jobs for survival. Whenever she grew tired, the only response she received was the bitter line, "You should be grateful you still have a roof over your head." Isabella's school years were cut short. She no longer went to class, no longer had friends, and dared not dream. Each night, when the children were asleep, she would sit by the old wooden window, staring at the faint stars in the Texas sky, wishing that one day she might live a different life. But every morning, her dreams were shattered by shouting voices and the stench of alcohol from her uncle. The true tragedy began when that man, already infamous for his brutality, began casting unclean eyes upon Isabella. One night, in the darkness, he tried to force his way into her room. Isabella had locked the door, trembling beneath a thin blanket. No one would protect her, no one would believe her if she spoke out. And so, on a moonless night, she quietly stuffed a few clothes into an old suitcase and left without a word. She would rather start over with nothing than live another day in fear. The months that followed were a long road of hardship. Isabella wandered from place to place, taking any job she could, washing dishes in diners, handing out flyers on street corners, scrubbing unfamiliar houses. Her hands grew calloused, but her eyes still carried a flicker of something faith, a fragile, faint faith, that one day she might find a true home. It was that faith that led her to Malibu, where fate placed her in the lives of Alexander and his twin boys. The ad for a nanny appeared in an old newspaper she had picked up at a bus stop. A wealthy family needed someone to care for 10-month-old twins with a high salary, but no one had lasted longer than a week. Isabella knew she had no degree, no references, but she had something few others brought, a heart desperate to love and to give love. She stepped into the luxurious estate with nothing but her bare hands, her neatly tied hair, and her sincere eyes. On the very first day, she noticed Noah was allergic to formula milk. Instead of complaining or waiting for instructions, she spent her entire first paycheck to buy goat's milk, trying until she saw that his stomach pains eased. Landon suffered from reflux, crying every night. Isabella adjusted his mattress, humming lullabies for hours. After a week, for the first time, the mansion fell silent in peaceful sleep. From that moment, she was no longer just a nanny, she became the lifeblood of the 2 children. Yet the memories of those years of humiliation remained etched in her mind. Each time Alexander showed coldness or suspicion, Isabella saw the shadow of her past return, reminding her that her love could be dismissed at any moment. And indeed, that morning when he shouted and ripped his children from her arms, the old scar split open once again. Could a girl who had endured so much pain find the strength to rise yet again to prove that true love is stronger than cold pride? When the door of the Malibu mansion closed behind Isabella, an invisible emptiness immediately enveloped the house. In that moment, Alexander believed he had done the right thing to protect his pride and control. But he could not foresee that this impulsive decision would usher in the darkest days for both his twin sons and himself. At first, the house sank into an unusual silence. But only hours later, that silence was torn apart by relentless cries. Noah and Landon, accustomed to warm arms, now wailed without end. No one could soothe them. The housekeeper panicked, and the new nannies brought in one after another found themselves helpless for the moment they approached. The twins screamed hysterically. Their cries echoed through every vast room, rebounded against the glass walls, and crept into every corner of the grand home. The $1 million mansion quickly became a cage filled with unrest. Alexander tried to reassure himself it was only temporary. He threw money at the problem, hiring the best professional nannies in Los Angeles. The first arrived with a thick schedule book: feeding times, sleeping times, bath times. But with impatient eyes and mechanical hands, she only deepened the children's panic. They screamed, refused to eat, and she left after just 2 days with the cold conclusion: these children have behavioral issues. The second was younger, always smiling, but inexperienced. When Landon vomited, she panicked, crying louder than the baby himself. Within 3 days, she was gone too, leaving only a scribbled apology note. And so it went, one after another, each nanny appearing, then disappearing, none able to endure the house filled with endless cries and tension. Meanwhile, Noah and Landon's health rapidly declined. They no longer laughed, no longer babbled as before. Their faces grew gaunt, their eyes hollow, shrinking like candles burning out. Missed meals, restless sleep turned them into fragile shadows. Their diaper rashes flared, their breaths wheezed from colds, and their empty stares would break the heart of anyone who saw them. Alexander, once convinced he could control everything with reason and money, began to feel powerless. He still tried to maintain composure before the staff, but at night, sitting alone in his office, he heard every cry cutting through the walls, weighing his chest like stone. The same hands that once signed multi-million-dollar contracts with confidence now trembled, holding a bottle his children refused. He realized he did not know how to cradle his sons properly, how to soothe them into silence. The man who once stood on the podium of tech glory had become a stranger in his own home. It wasn't just about the children, it was about him. Without their laughter, the mansion grew colder than ever. The glass walls that once reflected sunlight now exposed only loneliness. Every dinner was suffocating, with no sounds but spoons on plates and stifled sobs. Each night, Alexander tossed and turned, the memory of snatching his children from Isabella's arms cutting into him like a wound. 3 weeks passed, and the situation only worsened. The twins developed persistent high fevers, their breaths weak, their eyes red from sleepless nights. Harris, the seasoned gardener who had witnessed everything, looked at Alexander with sorrowful eyes. He knew the root of the tragedy was not illness, but emptiness of affection. An emptiness only one person could fill: Isabella. But Alexander, bound by his wounded pride, was not yet ready to admit that truth. He told himself he could fix it, that it was only a trial. Yet day by day, hour by hour, the two fragile lives weakened further, as though to remind him that he had lost the most precious thing of all. My dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water before we continue, because the story ahead holds even greater surprises. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world. Comment 1 if you find this story compelling, so we can continue bringing you even more powerful tales. When the twins' cries dragged on to the point of exhaustion, Alexander was forced to call the pediatrician who had been with the family since the day the boys were born. Dr. Julian Ramirez, a man with silver streaks in his hair, entered the lavish mansion with a stern gaze. He had seen Noah and Landon from their very first days. He knew they were not merely patients, but souls in desperate need of comfort. The checkup took place in a brightly lit room, yet the atmosphere was as heavy as a gray fog. The modern machines could not hide the truth, etched on the children's faces. Hollow eyes, weary breaths, fragile bodies. Dr. Ramirez quietly placed his stethoscope on each small chest, then sighed. What he heard was not the sound of ordinary illness, but the gasping breath of emptiness. He turned to Alexander, his tone steady yet firm. He explained that this was not just about fevers or malnutrition. It was severe separation anxiety, when children are torn from the one they are deeply bonded with. Their bodies reacted by weakening immunity, turning mild colds into pneumonia, ordinary coughs into days of agony. They don't need more medicine, they need safety, he declared. The words pierced Alexander like a blade. He still wanted to believe that money and top medical care were enough, but those words stripped him bare. The man who had prided himself on controlling everything suddenly realized he had let slip the most basic necessity, the love his children needed. After the doctor left, the house again sank into cries. That was when Mr. Harris, the gardener who had been with the family for over a decade, quietly stepped into the study where Alexander sat with his head bowed. He was no doctor, held no lofty titles, yet his aged eyes had witnessed things Alexander had never cared to see. Harris did not scold. Instead, he recalled the early days when Isabella first arrived. He spoke of the morning Noah finally stopped crying in her arms, the night Landon slept peacefully for the first time in months. His voice was slow, deliberate, like steady strokes of a hoe breaking the dry soil of pride. Since she came, this house had laughter, and you yourself slept soundly again. Do you remember the last time you truly felt peace? Alexander said nothing, his hands trembling as they clenched. In his mind, Isabella's image appeared vividly. Her gentle smile, her soft humming, her patient arms cradling the children. He remembered the look in the twins' eyes when she soothed them, that light he himself had never been able to give. Harris continued, his voice quivering with age yet carrying the weight of truth. You chased away the most precious thing in your life. Isabella did not harm them. She loved them more than herself. And since the day she left, this house has been nothing but a nightmare. Each word struck like a hammer blow against the shell of arrogance Alexander had built. He faced the painful truth. The fault was not Isabella's, it was his. He had viewed love through suspicion, and instead of gratitude, he had punished it. That night, Alexander could not sleep. He wandered through each darkened room, hearing the rasping coughs and choked sobs of his children. Each sound was an alarm bell, forcing him to confront the consequences of his own decision. For the first time, Alexander did not see himself as a successful millionaire, but as a failed father helplessly watching his children sink deeper into suffering. Was pride still worth anything when the price was the health and smiles of innocent children? There are moments that force a man to face the bare truth. For Alexander Hayes, that moment came on a night of heavy rain. His twin sons lay limp in the hospital after a prolonged fever, their fragile breaths flickering like candles in the wind. He stood at the foot of the bed, the same hands that once held an empire steady now trembling in helplessness. In that moment, the proud shell of a millionaire collapsed, leaving only the silhouette of a desperate father. He remembered Dr. Ramirez's words, "They don't need more medicine, they need safety." He remembered Harris's hoarse voice, "This house only had laughter when Isabella was here." Two different voices, but together they formed a single, undeniable truth. He had driven away the one person who could bring life back to his children. The next day, Alexander returned to the mansion and entered the small room where Isabella had once stayed. Everything still bore her trace. Curtains she had sewn from scraps, a few worn children's books neatly arranged on a shelf, a pillow faintly carrying her gentle scent. He sat down on the bed and for the first time allowed his tears to fall. In that silence, Alexander understood that the only path left for him was not new ventures, but the journey of redemption. He sought out Harris and asked for the address where Isabella was staying. The old man looked at him for a long while before finally nodding. No advice was given. Alexander's eyes already showed his resolve. He was no longer the man who only issued commands, but a father ready to humble himself to save his children. The car carried him to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts, far from Malibu's glittering world. The small house where Isabella lived was surrounded by a white wooden fence, bougainvillea cascading down as though embracing life's wounds. When Alexander stepped out of the car, his palms were slick with sweat. He had once negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions without flinching, yet now, just to knock on a door, his heart pounded uncontrollably. When the door opened, Alexander met the guarded eyes of the elderly landlady. He introduced himself hesitantly, asking only for a chance to see Isabella. Inside, the sound of children's voices rose not Noah and Landon, but 3 neighborhood orphans Isabella was caring for. They flocked around her, and in that humble scene, Alexander saw something money could never buy. Isabella had turned her pain into compassion, turning strangers into family. When their eyes met, Alexander was no longer the cold millionaire of before. He was just a father with dark circles under his eyes, desperately pleading for a chance. No excuses, no justifications, only a choked confession. He had been wrong. He had hurt her, and he had made his children suffer. He did not ask for forgiveness for himself. He only begged Isabella to return and save the 2 little boys growing weaker each day. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Isabella stayed silent, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. She had once believed she was nothing more than a fleeting shadow in that mansion, but now Alexander was laying all his hope and despair in her hands. Amid wounds not yet healed, her heart still trembled at the sound of Noah and Landon's names. Alexander knew the road to redemption would not end with an apology. It was only the beginning. He would have to prove it through action, through humility, through the love he owed his children and the woman he had once mistaken for an outsider. Can you guess what will happen next? Take a moment to relax, comment 1 or I'm still here to keep listening. In the white-lit hospital corridor, Alexander walked with a heavy heart. Each step echoed like a reminder of his mistakes. Beside him, Isabella remained silent, her face still marked by wounds of the past, yet her eyes could not hide the worry within. The car ride that had carried them from Mrs. Altha's modest home to the hospital passed in silence, but it was not the cold silence of distance. It was the silence of wounds searching for a chance to heal. When the door to the hospital room opened, the sight inside froze Isabella in place. The 2 boys she had once cradled now lay curled up on hospital beds, their tiny bodies wrapped in IV tubes. Noah was so thin his cheeks had sunk, while Landon coughed softly from time to time, his breath faint. Isabella stepped closer, and in that moment, a miracle happened. Though asleep, as if pulled by an invisible thread, both children stirred at once. Noah opened his red-rimmed eyes first, then Landon blinked weakly, his gaze falling upon the familiar face. In an instant, cries broke out, not cries of fear, but cries of recognition and relief. 2 trembling hands reached out, grasping for her. Isabella gathered them both into her arms, letting her tears fall onto their fine baby hair. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt warm. The machines, the beeping sounds, all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by the frantic rhythm of 3 hearts rediscovering each other. Alexander stood behind, his eyes blurred, witnessing for the first time an undeniable truth. Isabella was not merely a nanny. She was a refuge, a heart, a home he himself had never been able to build for his children. In the days that followed, Isabella never left the hospital. She cared for Noah and Landon as though the separation had never occurred. She adjusted their blankets while they slept, whispered lullabies whenever they startled awake, and, astonishingly, within days signs of recovery appeared. Their cheeks slowly regained color, tiny giggles broke free as Isabella played with them. Dr. Ramirez was surprised but smiled knowingly. No medicine had been as powerful as the presence of the one they were bonded to. During that time, Alexander was no longer the outsider. He sat beside Isabella, learning how to hold his children properly, how to prepare bottles the way she did. He listened carefully to the smallest instructions, things he had once dismissed. In the dim glow of the hospital room, there were moments when his eyes met Isabella's, and in hers there was no longer heavy resentment, but the fragile spark of trust. When the children were discharged, Alexander did not bring Isabella back as an employee. Instead, he prepared a small house within the mansion grounds, warm and welcoming for her and the orphans she cared for, a place they could truly call home. The stone path connecting the two houses became a bridge for little feet, children running back and forth, their laughter filling the gardens and shattering the silence that had long haunted the estate. Isabella remained cautious. She did not give her trust away easily, but she could not deny the changes in Alexander. He spent time playing with his children, fixing broken toys, sitting to listen when Isabella shared her past. Slowly, the fragile distance between them began to melt away. One golden afternoon, as they sat watching the children play beneath the bougainvillea, Alexander quietly laid his hand near Isabella's. She did not pull away. It was only a small gesture, but it was enough to mark a new beginning, not just for him and her, but for a family pieced back together from brokenness. Could this budding love overcome old wounds to become the foundation of a true family? Or would fate choose to test them once more? There are families bound by blood, and there are families built from love and patience. The story of Alexander, Isabella, and the children was proof of the latter. After stormy days, the light of peace finally found its way back to the once cold Malibu mansion. Noah and Landon recovered quickly with Isabella by their side. Their laughter once again rang out, echoing through the sun-drenched garden. Alexander, once a stranger to fatherhood, now learned to tie his children's shoelaces, to patiently wipe spilled milk from their shirts. He was no longer the cold millionaire defined by contracts, but a man who bent down to lift his children when they fell, who listened to every laugh and every cry. Isabella, too, began to believe that her return was not only for the twins, but because she herself had found a true home. At first, she kept her distance, afraid her trust might be betrayed again. But Alexander did not rush. He quietly walked beside her, sharing the smallest tasks. Cooking dinner together, sitting on the porch, watching the children play. Time did what empty promises never could. It proved that the change in Alexander was real. The small house he built for Isabella became a refuge where two worlds blended. 5 orphans she cared for, together with the twins, forming a lively portrait of family. The stone path connecting the two homes bore the daily marks of little feet, of children's bright voices calling out. The bougainvillea garden, once the witness of painful separation, was now the place where the family gathered around a wooden table for dinners under the sunset. On quiet evenings when the children's laughter subsided, Alexander and Isabella sat side by side, words unnecessary. A single glance was enough to show that old wounds were healing not by forgetting but by the new love that had blossomed. The tears that once fell in pain now fell in gratitude. Gratitude that they had not given up. Gratitude that fate had granted them a second chance. The following spring, they held a small ceremony in the garden. No extravagant wedding dress, no grand vows, just a long table covered with a white cloth, wildflowers in glass jars. 6 children sat around, laughing as Alexander tucked a bougainvillea flower into Isabella's dark hair. It was not the wedding of two individuals, but the uniting of a family, a promise that from now on none of them would ever face loneliness again. And then, the greatest miracle came as a reward for patience. Isabella became pregnant. The news filled the family with joy, not simply for the arrival of a new child, but because it symbolized hope. This baby carried the legacy of an entire journey of healing. When baby Hope cried out for the first time, the hospital room lit up with tears and laughter. A circle was finally complete. From the old rusty tub that once saw Isabella cast out, to the embrace of a family where she was cherished and loved. Years later, the Malibu estate was no longer a cold fortress, but a home filled with the sound of clumsy guitar strums, children calling mom and dad, and laughter that erased every scar. Alexander had once believed his worth lay in control and success. But now he understood, happiness was not measured by wealth, but by hearts willing to love, to forgive, and to rise together after mistakes. Love does not always come from perfection, but from patience, forgiveness, and the courage to give a second chance. The story of Alexander and Isabella reminds us that sometimes the most precious treasure is not found in money or fame, but in a home where the heart is welcomed. If you have ever carried wounds, believe that love has the power to heal. Thank you for following this story. Leave your comment below, share your feelings, and don't forget to spread this video to more people across the United States.